I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to the conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm glad to be here and glad to have you along as well. Today's program, I promise, will be an exceptionally powerful program. It'll deliver what I call a robust conversation. I say that because I'm going to be speaking with a person I just met, but I feel connected to already, and that is Rabbi Jessica Rosenberg. Rabbi Jessica Rosenberg serves on the Jewish Voice for Peace Rabbinic Council. She's the co-author with Rabbi Ariana Katz of For Times Such as These, A Radical's Guide to the Jewish Year, which is due to publish next year, and author of An Introduction to Trauma, Healing, and Resilience for Rabbis, Jewish Educators, and Organizers. Well, today we want to talk, obviously, about Israel-Palestine, the conflict, the historical and political context for this political movement. And I want to talk about what I have observed is in watching Rabbi Rosenberg on TV, on news, what I think is courageousness embodied and personified in her words, her thoughts, and her willingness to go to wherever the Spirit leads her to go and to say what the Spirit leads her to say. Rabbi Jessica Rosenberg, welcome to the conversation with Al McFarlane.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's protocol. Should I call you Rabbi Jessica or Rabbi Rosenberg or Rabbi Jessica Rosenberg? What's the best way to do it? Jessica. You can call me Al.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah. Rabbi Jessica it's great. Yeah.
Great. Okay, perfect. Start by introducing yourself, your background, and your movement to where you have become and operate as a rabbi.
Thank you so much. So I was raised in a Reconstructionist congregation, which is a movement of Judaism that's about 100 years old, and that was created really to create Judaism and Jewish community where people feel empowered to really embody our 3,000-year-old tradition as is aligned with our values today. So to take the millennia of tradition and then be like, what do we believe in today? Okay, let's live Jewish lives and embody Jewish practice that reflects that. And really beautiful and nourishing Jewish home and community that I was a part of, where people took care of each other, and like synagogue board meetings in the living room. My parents taught me that like you have to work for the spiritual community you want. You have to organize it and show up with food and sit through meetings and work it out with your people. And when I learned about Israel-Palestine and what was happening in Palestine in my early 20s, it was a different history than what I'd learned about Israel growing up, which is a very common experience for many Jews, and especially my generation of Jews, that we were taught one history of Israel where, coming out of experience of oppression, that like Israel was a place of safety and redemption for the Jewish people. And then in my early 20s, when I started actually learning about Palestinian history, and that there were people there before the state of Israel was founded and who were still to this day experiencing violence and displacement and inequality, that really rocked my world. And what I decided to do was go deeper into Judaism. And that's really my path to becoming a rabbi, was that I wanted to learn, like, how did we get here? How did my tradition that I love become now used in this really violent nation state in this country, in the country of Israel? Also, I wanted sustenance for like, I was really wrecked emotionally. And the thing that like helped me through was Jewish prayer and song and Shabbat and food. And so that's like really anyway, that's the short, long story of a little bit about how I got here. And I've been
here in Minnesota. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up outside of Philadelphia. I grew up in the suburbs of Philly, and then moved to Minneapolis just like kind of on a whim, but fell in love with it here and now I'm rooted here. Yeah.
And how and when did you become a rabbi?
So I went to rabbinical school from 6 years, 2013 to 18. And yeah, it was a real intense and challenging and beautiful 6 years of learning. And yeah, graduated and was ordained in 2018.
And the standard career path for graduates of the academy is what, or is there a standard? There might be many paths. What are some of the common things the graduates of the study, the training do?
Yeah, so most rabbis are, or like over 50% of my colleagues are congregational rabbis. The other half is split up between like college campuses, hospital chaplains, prison chaplains. And then like myself, most of my work has been in community organizing. So I worked for a few years for, like to give a sense, like organizing Jewish life for LGBTQ Jewish teenagers and like programs. And then I worked for a social justice organization, Bend the Arc, doing actually like turning out, like organizing Jewish community around like racial and economic justice, immigration and election stuff during 2020. So yeah, most of my work has been in organizing, political organizing and social justice movements in the Jewish community.
So take a minute, Rabbi and Rabbi Jessica, and tell us what you described a little bit of. You said you were raised with a traditional view, one narrative about the people and the vision and the hope that Israel would mean and bring to a people. But then you also got into a place where you looked more broadly and saw different analyses of the same occurrence or the same time and space and set of interactions. Explain that some more, if you would. I mean, go into that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so what Jews and many people refer to as like Israeli independence in 1948, Palestinians, and now many people who support Palestinian struggle refer to as the Nakba, which is Arabic for catastrophe. And it refers to in that time period in 1947, 48, 49, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were displaced from their homes, and many of them fled, as often refugees in war do, like thinking they would get to come home. And when Israel was established as a country, it gave Jews right to citizenship that Palestinians who'd been displaced didn't have. So there were some Palestinians who kept living in Israel and do have some citizenship in Israel. And there's Palestinian refugees all over the world, people, who fled and ended up in diaspora around the world. And then there's also Palestinians who live in the West Bank and Gaza, which, and getting into some historical weeds, which like there was another war in 1967 in which Israel gained control of the West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem. So now we have basically like Israel functionally controls the West Bank, Gaza, and what Israel proper, or what people will call 1948, those state bounds. And there are different laws for different people, like different rights of citizenship and representation for Palestinians compared to Israeli Jews. That is like the fundamental, when people talk about Israel as an apartheid state, that's what they're referring to. And that's, and what's happening in Gaza right now that has a lot of attention. And also what happened on October 7th, the Hamas attack on October 7th, all of that is happening in the context of 75 years since 1948 of Israel creating a country that Jews have rights that non-Jews don't. And that's kind of like the fundamental, for me, like at the end of the day, that is like a fundamental injustice that I have to work against.
Is the working against that some kind of reversion to the state that existed before 1947, 1948? Was that a state in which Palestinians, or let me be more specific, I think. Is it proper to say Arab Palestinians or Muslim Palestinians? What's the proper way to address the indigenous or native Palestinian population in that region?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, so before 1948, the land was controlled by the Ottoman Empire, or for many, you know, the kind of like biggest. And then as the Ottoman, we're going to get into like some limits of my ability to talk coherently about the history, but the Ottoman Empire, we had like Great Britain like taking over the land as the Ottoman Empire is crumbling. But what's, I think part of the core to your question is like before Israel, there were in that land, I mean, there's millennia of history of Jews, Christian, Muslims, Bedouin people, like all sorts of different people living in that land. And there's a long history of different empires fighting over, you know, like we got the Crusades, if you want to go way back, like, you know, like there's a lot of, you know, history, not of, you know, as there is with many parts of the globe, like there, you know, and what's true is that before 1948, there were Jews, Muslims, Christians living side by side.
That is the question. Did it ever exist? Could it have existed? And it did for 1,000, 2,000 years.
Yeah. Like that was, yes. And people will still, you know, you can read stories of folks, and I have friends Jewish friends whose families are, you know, 10 generations in Jerusalem who lived there before the state, and who lived next door to Christian and Muslim Palestinians, and were neighbor, you know, lived well alongside of each other. And part of what is complicated in talking about this is like, or it doesn't have to be complicated, I don't think, but like there is Jewish connection to that land. You know, like if you read the Bible, if you read Torah, like you will read about Jerusalem. And it's only with the creation of Israel as a Jewish supremacist state that's different than Jewish connection to the land, is what I want to say. Is like I face Jerusalem to pray, we face East to pray 3 times a day. That does not require an allegiance to a military and a nation state that puts Jewish rights above non-Jewish rights. You can face Jerusalem to pray and be praying for equality for all people in the land.
So the question that I think everybody wrestles with is there the possibility going forward of a single state that may have pre-existed, or a 2-state solution that satisfies every resident of the area and gives each resident a sense of security, peace, belonging, a sense of equity, in a way that also respects every other human being who ought to be having the same accorded to herself, himself, themselves. What do you think?
So one of the things, my main organizing with Jewish Voice for Peace, which is a national movement of Jews who are fighting for justice for Palestinians. And what we tend to say is, like, as American Jews, it is not up to us to decide what's going to happen over there. Like, that is for Israelis and Palestinians to work out. We are kind of focus our work on the 3 demands of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, or BDS, which is something I would love to, I think people have like heard a little bit about this, but don't necessarily know like what it is. And so the BDS movement, and I will answer your question. I'm going to just come
sure,
around.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the BDS movement is organized by civil society organizations in Palestine and Palestinian organizations in diaspora. It's a call to boycott, fight for divestment from, and sanctions against Israel until 3 goals are achieved. So it's equal rights for Palestinians in the land, an end to the occupation, which is the infrastructure of control in the West Bank and Gaza, and right of return for Palestinian refugees. So everyone who was displaced and their descendants in 1948 and 1967, displacement's happening right now, for those people to get to return. And what we say is like any number of states or any system, federate, kind of like any system of government that you can create where people will have equal rights, end to the occupation, like freedom of movement and all of what that entails, and refugees' right of return. We're not trying to answer like how many states that's going to be. I think that like some people's idea of the 2-state solution still has inequality. Like I don't, I can't get behind like part of being a Jew in diaspora is that I could move to Israel tomorrow and get citizenship. That's like the special thing about a Jewish state. Palestinians and the descendants, and I'm not, you'd have to go back 1,000, 2,000 years to like find my family's connection. Maybe I would want to move back. Like that's, there's a lot of Jewish history and tradition there. It's a special place. But the fact that I could move back and get citizenship, whereas like living refugees from 1948 cannot, we don't accept that. Like, I don't, part of what I'm saying is like, I don't want citizenship in a state where the people displaced in this lifetime can't get citizenship or can't move back. So yeah, and I think
what I'm hearing you say is there's no magic in the phrase 2-state solution, and what may be under the radar is a multi-state or some other configuration, and that the approach ought to be one that has the potential to assess and allow to emerge several systems as long as they meet these 3 conditions, right? Is that the direction that you're speaking from or to?
Yeah. And I also want to say, like, I deeply care about Jewish safety there and here. Like, I want, part of what is painful about the idea that Israel will keep Jews safe. One, that's clearly not true, what we've seen in this time. And it's like, I want to be safe here. Like, I live here. I don't, I don't want to move there to like have safety. I don't speak the language very well. Like, I don't, I'm like, that's not my home. And so yeah, so I the like equal rights and to the occupation, right of return, and everyone being able to my personal hope and dream, like everyone be able to worship in their sacred sites and be safe around the world. Like, that's the movement that we're fighting for. That's being part of movements for justice everywhere.
So Rabbi Jessica, what do you do though if some of the elements of society don't see things that way and think that and describe it as a do or die, all or none? And I think that you said you want to see Jews safe. I think you want to see everybody else safe as well. What if somebody who's not Jewish thinks the best thing is to eliminate Jews? What if a person who's not a Palestinian thinks the best way to get security for Jews is to eliminate Hamas? And Hamas becomes a metaphor not just for individual warriors or soldiers, but for the entire group of people. It ends up being code language, right? Because what's at risk is the potential to say for all of us, for both sides, it's all or nothing. That's genocide. And how do we protect Jewish people from any language, movement, any thought, any possibility of genocide against Jewish people? How do we protect Palestinians? And ultimately, every human being from this notion that somebody else can decide that you have no right to exist.
Yeah.
How do we get there?
I'm going to ask you that question. How do we get there? I mean, yeah, I'm just going to take a second because that's such a big question. And that's, that's what we're kind of spending our lives fighting for and trying to figure out. That's the question of like liberation and how do we all get free? I think that, when I want to live in a world where all people are valued and where we take care of our neighbors and protect the earth and value life. And I think that like every community and tradition and culture and people have elements of like, we're going to protect our own and we're going to like wall ourselves off and protect our own and see others as hostile and kind of like push away and protect and defend. And I think every tradition, spiritual practice, culture has elements of like seeing the humanity and the holiness of every person and of other cultures and traditions. And I think this is part of why I feel blessed to be both organizer and part of political movements and also a rabbi who gets to connect with people around heart and soul, is to like awaken that humanity, that like, I think, and I don't mean this in, I think when you talk about kind of like how to, this like big scale, I think, I'm getting very like personal, which is kind of like, we need to build one at a time, organization by like block by block, city by city, like learn about each other's histories. And every community has experienced unbearable oppression and trauma. And learn about each other, be curious about each other's healing and safety. And like, what do you need, Al? What do I need, Jessica? Like, what does fighting for you mean? Like what, kind of, learning the specifics of that, like I think that every community's oppression, when we think about like what it will mean to have indigenous land back on this land, what it means to have reparations for slavery, and when I think about the history of antisemitism and the ways that that's looked like, there's actually we need to like learn about each other. Yeah, I mean, I think, and I'll say one last thing, this is such a big question that I'll be sitting with for a while, but like part of what is scary about what was happening in Israel before October 7th is this like very right-wing government that like Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, best friends with Trump, best friends with Modi in India, like these are like fascist leaning, like, I mean, we're just straight up fascist, like people who like corrupt politicians who want control and are propped up by extremist elements who are like us versus them, and like, so I don't think they represent most people on the planet. And I think we are part of what we in conversations like this is like getting to know each other so that we can organize. There are I believe there are more people who want freedom and safety for all than people who want to control and fight. And so that's like the work of every day, the work of the lifetime. Yeah. What do you think we should do?
Well, what I hear you saying and what I believe is that it's about changing the narrative, elevating new narratives and elevating narratives that reflect and reveal possibilities that we simply haven't grasped, but they are there. And there has to be a certain intentionality, a certain desire, and a certain belief in our humanity, our humanness, right? That allows us to connect with every other human being, and a certain training and development of our facility or faculties to understand what life and living are about in a way that allows us to also be empathetic with other living beings and things, plants, animals, and ultimately gives us an awareness that lets us understand how we are codependent and we are sharing with the inanimate, with the mineral world, space that those systems have equity or represent equity, not for our extraction and exploitation, but for engagement in ways that promote responsible stewardship of existence itself and responsible, sort of enlightened action where individual steps and words reflect a philosophy of knowledge and peace and of kindness, of sharing, and of capability, right? To say that we are capable. I am capable of loving you and being loved by you. And the love that we can experience and express is a love that heals both of us and heals all of those around us, because we walk that way, right? And we talk that way, and we shake hands that way, we embrace that way, we tell stories that keep that in the front of our minds, the front of our bodies, so that we are attempting to elevate, express the healer, the healing from within. Now, I've gone out in the deep water here. You asked me the question, right? But I think that I have, despite the pain and despite the suffering, I'm still optimistic. I'm angry that there's so much suffering. And I'm concerned. I weep at the suffering whenever it occurs, and why, for whatever reason that it did occur. And I have to say that I have to agree that 1948 and the 2,000 years that preceded it notwithstanding, I cannot rejoice in October 7th, October 6th, or nor can I rejoice in the retaliation.
No.
And so what can I do? What can I say that encourages all of us who are affected either distantly or closely, to breathe and take the time to figure out ways to work through this with as little pain as possible, without as much death, without as much destruction, retribution, and demonization of the other. So let me shift it to you again. Then what is Zionism, and how does the question of Zionism come to play here? Because that takes us back to a global stage again, correct?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, this, even though you said we can't tell the people in Palestine and Israel what to do, they've got to work it out. But we have to work it out as well, because it's not just them. That's sort of the theater, that's the stage. But we're the audience, and the audience is really a part of this play as well.
Yeah, well, and thank you for bringing it back. Yeah, I am. So yeah, when I was saying, okay, I'm gonna, so much in what you're saying in your questions, I'm gonna dive back in with you. What I was saying about kind of, it's not up to us in the US to decide one state or two or 18 over there. What is really our role? The US government is the biggest enabler of Israel and Israel's policies and the occupation and the current siege on Gaza. So $3 billion of US tax dollars a year have been going to Israel. It's more in the last month. That is money that is we are paying taxes, and it goes to war in Israel. And it goes to kill Palestinians. And That is money that should be going to our schools, our hospitals and healthcare system, relieving student debt, housing, roads, like just like everything that we don't have enough money for here, like is right there being used. And so that in that way, like that's one of the main like on ramps for people to get engaged. In addition to like, obviously our hearts hurt when we see suffering all around the world. And sometimes there's this question of like, why are we singling out Israel? Israel gets like the most money in US military funding. And it's our tax dollars. So not only are we like the audience, you know, we're like producers in some ways. Right? Like, I don't know what the theater metaphor is.
Right.
Or we paid for tickets and it's rough. So that is, and just to say, most of the money that goes to Israel in military funding, it's required to be used for US weapons manufacturers. And so people are getting rich off this war, as is true with every war. People are getting rich off of it, which is so enraging. And there was really beautiful action, or like part of the movement that's happening right now is about, you know, divest from militarism completely. Like the US war machine, that is money that should be, again, like our schools, our children, our housing, our healthcare. That's what that money should be going for, not to kill poor people and Black and brown people in other places, which is like tale as old as time. You know, that's like that's what the Vietnam War movie, you know, that's what Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was saying in the 60s. That's like the fight we've been fighting for a long time. So it is very it's very connected to here. I can pause there. I think your other question was about Zionism. Should I get into that?
Yeah, what point is that? What is define that, and how does it fit into this whole conversation?
Yeah. So Zionism. So I'll just back up and say, you know, what I said about kind of like, if you read in the Hebrew Bible, you'll read about Jerusalem, you'll read about Sion, like the Hebrew word for Zion. That, you know, spiritual connection to the land is, you know, millennia old as Judaism. Zionism, you can hear in the word, you know, it sounds like with the IS, you know, that's like an English word, Zionism, is a 19th century, so like late 1800s European political movement that responded to European anti-Semitism by saying the only Jewish safety would come from a Jewish majority or Jewish supremacist, Jewish only nation state. You know, anti-Semitism in Europe was very real, is very real, you know, and there were different answers to like, okay, how are we going to fight for Jewish safety? And this was just one answer, that like the way to get Jewish safety is to create a state. And there were different places. There was like a brainstorm in the 1890s. There was a movement, you know, there was like some settlements in like upstate New York to create a Jewish colony there. There was the Uganda plan. There was like a idea of sending a bunch of Jews to Uganda. Eventually the movement, the folks organizing this were like historic Palestine, you know, for a bunch of reasons.
The literature supports the idea of historic Palestine, doesn't it?
Like
more than anywhere else.
It is, you know, it was a compelling place because of the Jewish history and spiritual connection. You know, and one thing to say about that is that Christian Zionists are as old as Jewish Zionists. So there's this phrase, a land without a people for a people without a land. That was kind of an idea of Zionism that erases Palestinians. That was actually like a European Christian, like a British, I don't remember what denomination, but like that was a Christian concept, like who first said that, a land without a people for a people without a land. So from the beginning, that was part of why that place, like, yes, there was Jewish connection to that place, but there were Christian Zionists who from the beginning were like, this is good for the rapture. This is like part of what will bring the second coming of Jesus, is for all the Jews to move to the Holy Land. Spoiler alert, it doesn't go well for Jews at the end of that. They're not friends of the Jew. Like we don't, you know, like it's, a complicated theology that is like actually pretty anti-Semitic to say like Jews are all going to move there and then the rapture will happen and then Jews don't fare well at the end of that story. Okay. But that's part of Zionism. It's that it's a political ideology that in the beginning was not very popular among Jews. They were like, why would we, around among European Jews, like, why would we move there? We have our lives here. Jumping ahead, again, this is like 1890s, 1900s, after 1948, when the world still didn't, like, even as the world was learning about the Holocaust and the concentration camps in Europe, did not open their doors to Jewish refugees. And that's when Israel became a compelling, which makes so much sense, like that was, you know, like incredible, overwhelming trauma and violence and lack of safety to the utmost degree that like, okay, you can move to this place. We're going to fight for a specific Jewish country that's going to protect you. And that's, you know, on a very short encapsulated Zionism. It's the political movement. Judaism and Jewishness as a culture, religion, tradition, people, you know, existed for 2,000 to 3,000 years, depending on when you're starting the clock, before the political movement of Zionism, and is still separate. Like, we have always had anti-Zionist Jews who are practicing the religion, culture, and tradition and don't support the political movement to make a Jewish supremacist nation state in Israel.
So the legacy families who stayed in Palestine before the creation of Israel, what happened with them? What happens with them? Do they incorporate themselves into the growing and new power system, the nation of Israel? Or is that where you see the wide variety of voices? You know, there's a predominant narrative that comes out of the official government, as you know, presented by Prime Minister Netanyahu, and that is the focal point of generally American policy and support and finance. But that is kind of so big that we don't see the complexity of both voices and interest on the ground in Israel, but also in the diaspora. And you represent the emergence of complicated thought from my point of view. But I think it's not unique. I think there probably are many, many, many people. And what you just said is that you think that there are more of you than there are of them. The question is what the narrative is. People that want peace and that want healing, as opposed to people who think that peace and healing can only come at the cost of suppressing or, you know, creating walls around us and keeping them out, keeping them down. And am I stating it the way that makes kind of sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I think about the Jewish community specifically, like after World War II and the Holocaust, the collective response was like, we really can't trust the world now. You know, like, look what happened. Jews in Germany were like allegedly assimilated, you know, kind of like had actually, compared to other places in Europe, were like very assimilated actually, and like seemingly accepted. And then look what happened. And this is how, you know, so now like Israel, this is where, and look what happened. So now this is where we're going to be safe. I think actually what you're saying about a new story, that is like one of the primary, I feel like my work as a rabbi is about telling different stories where we don't look at Jewish safety in a bubble separated from other people and from other people's oppression. And we don't wall ourselves off, but we actually like work towards safety and interdependence with other peoples and other histories, and know that to like end anti-Semitism, we must end racism, we must end Islamophobia. Like, we, you know, that these things are interconnected. And as far as I do think most people want peace and safety for their family and have not been shown a vision of how their peace and safety is interdependent and connected to everyone else's peace and safety. And that's what we got to, that's the work. Yeah, that's what we got to do.
Let me take a break and we'll come back and continue the conversation. I'm Al McFarlane. You're listening to The Conversation with Al McFarlane. My guest is Rabbi Jessica Rosenberg, and what a great conversation. Jessica Rosenberg serves on the Jewish Voice for Peace Rabbinic Council. She's the co-author with Rabbi Ariana Katz of For Times Such as These. We've got a picture of that, A Radical's Guide to the Jewish Year, which is due to publish next year. She's author of An Introduction to Trauma, Healing, and Resilience for Rabbis, Jewish Educators, and Organizers. We'll be back in a second to continue this conversation. Are you or someone you know recovering financially from the COVID-19 pandemic, the lockdown, or any other reason? If so, help is available. Findhelp.org is a site to find a wide range of resources, including food, medical care, and more. The best part is based on your zip code. Visit findhelp.org, enter your zip code and the service you need. You'll get a map directing you to the organizations that can help you. Help is waiting at findhelp.org. If you need help starting anew, findhelp.org is the site for you. I'm Al McFarlane. I'm talking with Rabbi Jessica Rosenberg. Again, she serves on the Jewish Voice for Peace Rabbinic Council. She's a co-author with Rabbi Ariana Katz of For Times Such as These, A Radical's Guide to the Jewish Year. It's due to be published next year. She's also author of An Introduction to Trauma, Healing, and Resilience for Rabbis, Jewish Educators, and Organizers. Rabbi Jessica, so pleased to spend this time with you, and thank you so much for being here, but also for what you do and what you say and how you move in the world. I said before that I've watched you on TV, and I'm just totally impressed with you. And I'm impressed with what I think is just a huge amount of courage. And I don't know that you're feeling courageous, but I'm saying you're looking courageous, you know. And the feeling, I saw one clip, I was watching somebody's channel, and you were going into a building, maybe in South Minneapolis, going up some stairs, and some people trying to get in the door, like activists, it seemed like to me. And whoever you were going to see or speak to was trying to, manage order. You might remember that. But I said, you just kept moving. You kept focused on what you were doing. And I was impressed. That was one, and there were several like that I've seen. Before we go further, we ask you to give an inspirational quote. Maybe you'd share that quote. And then I would love for you to spend the last 3 minutes talking about what is anti-Semitism and how does fighting anti-Semitism connect and fit into the movement for racial justice. That's my question. But Rabbi, you go anywhere you want to speak on whatever's on your mind and your heart.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, when you say I'm courageous, or I appear courageous, and who knows what's happening for me, it's like the war, the siege on Gaza, the bombing of Gaza these last months has just like, it's really, really painful to watch. I know everyone is feeling this and feeling like powerless and like, how do I throw my body at and try to stop this? And what, Palestinians are facing, I'm just like, what the conditions that Palestinians are living in Gaza, the retaliation and violence that's still happening to Palestinians in the West Bank, both from the Israeli military and from settlers, Jewish settlers in the West Bank, and what Palestinians are facing here, like the backlash for speaking out and for telling their stories. And some of the actions that I've done, I feel all sorts of in my body before going into, public action situation, like, it's an intense feeling. I was not, I'm like a good daughter who's doesn't like to yell at people or like push my way into things. And also like watching what's happening, it's like, I have to do what I can. And Uh,
How do your mom and dad feel about you? What are they telling you?
My mom has been really supportive and is really proud of me. And we've had 12 years. When I first started doing organizing for Palestine, neither of my parents were very happy about it. My dad passed away in 2019. He was proud of me even when he did not agree with me. He was proud. He expressed that he was like proud that I was standing up for what I believed in, even though he really, really didn't like what I was doing. But it was a gift that he could articulate that. And my mom over the years has moved politically about this, and she supports a ceasefire, which is, just to like come back around, like what we're currently fighting for is the US to support a ceasefire, which means all violence. I should have opened with this an hour ago, but like Israel stopping bombing, an end to violence, return of hostages, and freeing of prisoners. That as like the baseline condition for any sort of repair and justice and safety to happen. And my mom supports that with me. We still have conversations about, like what do we want it to look like over there? And like, what is, like how, what is safety, kind of like what's possible in the future. And like right now she really is with me in fighting for a ceasefire. And I like to believe that my dad is cheering for me and hope, that like he can believe in safety and justice. And yeah.
And so focus then on the question of anti-Semitism and the justice movement broadly.
Yeah. So one of the things, to your point about kind of like how do we tell new stories, Jews need a different story and understanding around anti-Semitism, like very much. There's an idea that we get taught that anti-Semitism is like a unique oppression, kind of like separate from every other form, that it's like the world's oldest oppression is a thing people say, or like, kind of like in every society there exists anti-Semitism. And there's this idea, sometimes people talk of it as cyclical, like it, kind of comes and goes in cycles, which has this way of making it seem inevitable, which I reject. I don't believe that any form of hatred or oppression, we just shouldn't accept it as inevitable or like coming back around. Like we have to fight for it to end. That's what you were talking about like hope, like I have to get out of bed every morning believing that there can be a world without anti-Semitism, without racism, without homophobia, like, so, and it's, it's made by humans, like it's not the natural world. Like the sun didn't, grow anti-Semitism or racism out of the ground. Like that's a thing's human created. So we can choose to do something different. So, anti-Semitism, when we, like hatred and oppression of Jews, stereotyping of Jews, violence against Jews. One thing to be clear about is that like, Jews are a multiracial, multicultural, multi-ethnic people. There are Jews on every continent. There are Jews of every race and language. And a lot of the narrative around anti-Semitism really focuses on the Holocaust and European Jews and erases Jews from all over the rest of the world. So what we need, to like be clear about calling out hatred and oppression of Jews while not erasing Black and brown Jews, indigenous Jews, Sephardi Jews, which is Jews from the Iberian Peninsula of Spain and Portugal, Mizrahi Jews, which are Middle Eastern or South, Iraqi, Iranian, Moroccan Jews are very old, like the oldest Jewish communities are from Palestine, Iraq, Iran, or like the lands that are currently that, and okay, you asked these big questions. So we need to tell a story of fighting anti-Semitism that includes everyone, and be specific to say, there is one story of anti-Semitism that says Jews control the economy, control the media. That is one strand of anti-Semitic rhetoric that white Christian men, in particular, in power, have used to divert attention from their own power and weaponize or kind of, like separate working people from each other and divide our movements. There is,
let's sit in that for a minute.
Yeah.
So the question of power and the use of power, the control of power, the techniques and tools, like projecting on someone else to divert attention away from your own activity, which is hegemony, or which is the usurpation, right? And the control of resources and people and places. And so is the path to peace some kind of illumination or retraining or undoing of a process that has produced this scarcity model? If you get it, it means I can't have it, or what I have, I will lose if you get what I have. And so I've got to keep you under my thumb at the margin. Black people at the margin, Palestinians at the margin, indigenous people at the margin, I mean, there's anywhere you can draw the lines and show where this process of thinking takes place. How do we get past that? I'll throw one more thing out at you that I think you'll appreciate having a chance to respond to, the question of patriarchy itself. And I think that's on the table right now as we look at how we move forward, and patriarchal thought reflecting an attitude about the order of existence that may not be ultimately beneficial for existence.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is like where you ended with that is like any system that has like power over, where like somebody gets to dominate somebody else. That's like the core of patriarchy, the core of racism, the core of settler colonialism and land theft. The core of the climate crisis is like human supremacy over the earth that feeds us and sustains us. So I think there are a lot of different tools that the very few with the most and power use to maintain their power and divide and conquer the majority of us. And anti-Semitism is one of them. Misogyny is one of them. Racism is one of them. That's like, So just, that's part of the work that we're doing, is like how to, and it all gets inside us. Like we do, and then we like are told these stories about each other having more, being dangerous, being different. That like, so there's work to do in, changing the systems, the deeply unequal systems, and especially in the US, where everything is shaped by land theft and labor theft and stolen everything, and then there's the work to do inside of ourselves that is like, what are the stories that I've been told about other people, and how do I unlearn those in myself, which I think only comes from sitting and connecting, from connecting.
Would you read the piece that you put in the notes, your inspirational quote, and talk about that?
Yeah, the Aurora Levins-Morales.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. I put a long one.
Go ahead. Yeah, read it. Good time.
Okay. In her book, Medicine Stories, History, Culture, and the Politics of Integrity, there's an essay, The Historian as Curandera, Historian as Healer. And she writes, Aurora Levins-Morales writes, the role of a socially committed historian is to use history, not so much to document the past as to restore to the dehistoricized a sense of identity and possibility. Such medicinal histories seek to reestablish the connection between people and their histories, to reveal the mechanisms of power, the steps by which their current conditions of oppression was achieved through a series of decisions made by real people to dispossess them, but also to reveal the multiplicity, creativity, and persistence of resistance among the oppressed. History is the story we tell ourselves about how the past explains the present and how the ways in which we tell it are shaped by contemporary needs.
That's powerful. Talk about what is it? How does that guide you?
Yeah, so Aurora's book, and so she is a Puerto Rican Jewish teacher and writer, and folks in Minneapolis might know her brother, Ricardo Levins Morales, artist and organizer here, and really power sibling crew. So her book, this essay really actually was like part of how I ended up going to rabbinical school, was this idea of medicine stories, was the idea of like, what's the story we've been told about ourselves? What's the history that's been hidden? And there's a role for learning history and then telling it in ways that is medicine for people that can like literally heal and transform our ideas about ourselves individually and collective and the world. So yeah, what I love about this is like, so much of the story of racism and white supremacy and patriarchy blame oppressed people for their oppression. Like if you're poor, it's your fault. And like erase the actions that stole everything, of the land. And similarly, try to keep us down by like hiding all the ways in which our ancestors fought back and won things and like keep us ignorant of that. And so, yeah, she writes about like there's a way for historians to be healers by being like, wait, how did we actually get here? Like who stole the, like how, what was taken? And also like, how have people resisted so that we can like learn from that resistance and creativity and keep it going. So yeah, that's a big inspiration. Recommend the whole essay and the whole book. Yeah.
Let me have you close on reconnecting to the idea of why there should be a ceasefire and why it's so important.
Yeah. So I think what we're now, the last time I looked, over 20,000 people have been killed in Gaza in 2 months' time. None of those deaths bring back the 1,200 Israelis killed on October 7th. It's just more death, and it doesn't make anyone safer. We need a ceasefire so that there can be some chance to negotiate a different way forward in Israel and Palestine. And it's really like, it looks impossible to stop, and it is up to us. It is fully up to us. It is up to a mass movement of people in the US to change the US government's policy towards this. We saw a UN vote for ceasefire where only the US voted no, blocked to vote for a ceasefire. The rest of the world is clear about this, and the US manipulates ideas about Jewish safety to actually just profit from the war machine. And so I want to end with a plug that we're, in Minneapolis, there are folks organizing for a city council resolution in support of a ceasefire. We think most of our city council people will support it. There's putting pressure on our senators and representatives. There is ways to also just like get involved and learn more and like learn where our tax dollars are going and be vocal about what's needed here. That is for all of us. There's like ways for everyone to connect to this. Yeah.
Jessica, we're out of time. Rabbi Jessica Rosenberg, thank you so much. Keep up the good work. Will you come back? I want to keep this conversation going.
Totally. Yeah. So next time, can I ask you the questions? I want to hear.
Sure. That'd be fine. I'd love to. Yeah, that'd be fine. We can do that. It's a conversation. I'll see you next time. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.